J.D. Vance, the U.S. Vice President, is due to speak soon.
To the Prime Minister of Pakistan and to Field Marshal Munir, who were both incredible hosts. And whatever shortcomings in the negotiation, it wasn't because of the Pakistanis, who did an amazing job and really tried to help us and the Iranians bridge the gap and get to a deal. We have been at it now for 21 hours, and we've had a number of substantive discussions with the Iranians. That's the good news. The bad news is that we have not reached an agreement, and I think that's bad news for Iran much more than it's bad news for the United States of America. So we go back to the United States having not come to an agreement. We've made very clear what our red lines are, what things we're willing to accommodate them on, and what things we're not willing to accommodate them on. And we've made that as clear as we possibly could, and they have chosen not to accept our terms. Questions?
Sir, Nick Robertson from CNN. Precisely what have they rejected here? Can you help us understand it a little bit?
Well, I won't go into all the details because I don't want to negotiate in public after we negotiated for 21 hours in private. But the simple fact is that we need to see an affirmative commitment that they will not seek a nuclear weapon, and they will not seek the tools that would enable them to quickly achieve a nuclear weapon. That is the core goal of the President of the United States, and that's what we've tried to achieve through these negotiations. Again, their nuclear program, such as it is, the enrichment facilities that they had before, they've been destroyed. But the simple question is, do we see a fundamental commitment of will for the Iranians not to develop a nuclear weapon, not just now, not just 2 years from now, but for the long term? We haven't seen that yet. We hope that we will. Jen.
Was there a framework on anything? And also, did the Iranian frozen assets come up, and did you reach any conclusions on those frozen assets?
We talked about all those issues, Jen, and we talked about a number of issues beyond that. And so certainly those things came up. But again, we just could not get to a situation where the Iranians were willing to accept our terms. I think that we were quite flexible. We were quite accommodating. The president told us, you need to come here in good faith and make your best effort to get a deal. We did that. And unfortunately, we weren't able to make any headway. Preston.
Mr. Vice President, how often did you communicate with President Trump throughout the negotiations? There were reports that there were multiple rounds where there were breaks in between negotiations. How often did you communicate with the president throughout those rounds, and what was he saying as you were going through these negotiations that you said fell short?
Yeah, obviously we were talking to the president consistently. I don't know how many times we talked to him, a half dozen times, a dozen times over the past 21 hours. We obviously also talked to Admiral Cooper, to Pete, to Marco, to the entire national security team. We talked to Scott Bessent a number of times. So look, we were constantly in communication with the team because we were negotiating in good faith. And we leave here with a very simple proposal, a method of understanding that is our final and best offer. We'll see if the Iranians accept it. Thank you.
Mr. Vice President, where does this leave this trade for moves?
Did you going back to war, sir?
Okay, that was the U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance.
जो अमरीकी डेलीगेशन है वो वापस अमेरिका के लिए रवाना हो गया है। इससे पहले नायब सदर जेडी वेंस ने जो है वो प्रेस ब्रीफिंग दी और अब खबर ये सामने आ रही है कि अमेरिकन जो डेलीगेशन है वो वापस रवाना हो गया है। आप अपनी ये मनाजिर जो है वो स्क्रीन पर भी देख सकते हैं। सिक्योरिटी हाई अलर्ट है और जेडी वेंस को आप देख सकते हैं कि ये रवाना हो गया है वापस अमरीकी वफ्द। वज़ीर आज़म शहबाज शरीफ और फील्ड मार्शल सैयद आसिम मुनीर ने जो ये वफ्द है अमेरिकन उसको रवाना किया है। आपको अपडेट कर रहे हैं नाजरीन को यहाँ पर कि अमरीकी जो वफ्द है वो अब वापस रवाना हो चुका है। वज़ीर आज़म शहबाज शरीफ और फील्ड मार्शल सैयद आसिम मुनीर ने अमरीकी वफ्द को रुखसत किया है। नायब वज़ीर आज़म इसहाक दार
It is imperative that the parties continue to uphold their commitment to ceasefire. Pakistan has been and will continue to play its role to facilitate engagement and dialogue between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States of America in the days to come.
Well, it appears that after all of the effort that was put in, there is no deal. There is an understanding on the table that you can take out from that statement, that there is something on the cards that the Vice President says that is their best and final offer. And I think that is something which would, if you were an optimist, giving you some hope that there is still the negotiations process is not dead. I was speaking to a source just before we heard that the vice president is going to be making a statement. And they told me that, well, the good thing is that there is no breakdown, but the bad thing is that there is no breakthrough. And according to the vice president, well, the bad thing is that they're leaving without a deal. During these talks, it was never going to be easy. We were hearing from various diplomats, various sources, and there was very little concrete information coming out. So there was the first round, and the second round. So we believe there were about 5 rounds, and after every single one of them, there were exchanges of notes between these two sides. So it appears that there is some sort of a wider framework that both sides have come towards. I think there is a proposal and a counter proposal from what we gather from J.D. Vance, and there's not been an agreement. So now we'll have to see what the Iranians have to say about it, because the sources that we were speaking to during the day, they were of the view that the United States is asking for maximalist positions, especially when it came to the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranians are not willing to budge on that, and they say that they've been talking about multiple issues, including the nuclear program, including their influence in the region, including other issues regarding the economics of all of this, because the Iranians have been insistent about an asset unfreeze from the United States as well. So it appears that there has been some movement, because if they were to break down completely, that would have happened much earlier. So going in, you heard from Bagher Kalibaf saying that this is only going to be successful if there is an asset unfreeze and the issue of the Lebanese ceasefire. That has not transpired. We believe from our sources that there is some indication of an agreement with Israel that it is not going to bomb the capital Beirut, and is going to continue its operations in the south. But again, this is all drip information that we were getting from some sources. So we'll have to wait and see on the Iranian version of events. And then obviously the interlocutors who were the Pakistanis, diplomats that I've been speaking to tell me that there's been tremendous effort that has been put into just bringing these sides to the table. A historic day where they, for the first time since the 1979 revolution in Iran, were able to bring such high level people face to face with each other.
Osama, what should we read into the fact that no mention was made of whether there will be any more talks, when there might be more talks? Do we take that as a positive sign or a negative sign?
Well, it will all depend on the other side, because right now we've heard from the Americans, and J.D. Vance is leaving by saying this is their best and final offer. So there is an offer on the table. I think that we can take away from it. Now, he's saying that they were not able to make progress because it appears that they have not moved from that offer that they made. So whether this was an offer that they came with to begin with, whether this was an offer that transpired during those multiple rounds of negotiations, where there was a give and take from the sources that we were talking to in the government, they were telling us that there is their push is that unless there is a compromise, unless both sides are willing to give and take, these things cannot move forward. And there was no expectation of a major breakthrough here today because of, you remember how long it took for the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, where experts and politicians and nuclear scientists poured over every single line. So it appears that the diplomacy is not dead, but as in the words of the U.S. Vice President, it is unfortunate that they are leaving without a deal.
Okay, Osama, we'll leave it there. Osama bin Javed there for us in Islamabad. I just want to recap for anyone who might be joining us right now what we heard there from the U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, who, after those marathon talks in Pakistan to bring together a deal between Iran and the U.S., announced that there was no result in an agreement to permanently end the war as a result of those talks. I'll just quote what he he said, we've been at it now for 21 hours. We've had a number of substantive discussions with the Iranians. That's the good news. The bad news is that we have not reached an agreement, and I think that's bad news for Iran, much more than it's bad news for the United States of America. So we go back to the United States having not come to an agreement. Let's bring in Mike Hanna, who is live in Washington, D.C. So, Mike, J.D. Vance on his way back now to the United States. What should we take away from all this?
Well, is the glass half full or half empty? Very difficult to discern from those brief remarks made by the Vice President. And also, let's see when he actually leaves Pakistan, although he says he is on his way back to the United States now. But taking a look at some of the positive aspects, first of all, that the talks lasted for so long indicates that they were indeed substantive, that very substantive issues were discussed, as the Vice President Vance does allude to. In his comment as well, there was a very interesting statement that he made that the U.S. has destroyed Iran's ability to create a nuclear program at this stage. But he said what the U.S. is looking for is a commitment from Iran never to do so. So this has moved away from, OK, you've got to stop your enrichment, OK, you've got to stop developing a nuclear capability, to don't even think about doing it. So this is actually a major issue, because that has completely switched the terms of what was being negotiated about, both before the conflict in the 2 rounds of indirect negotiations that were heard, and quite possibly in the negotiations that have been taking place now. But we are still uncertain whether any form of technical discussion is going on. At one stage, it was said that the technical teams will now meet and discuss very substantive technical issues with regard to the agreement. We do not know whether that has been put on hold at all. And we do not know what is in what Vice President J.D. Vance said was his final offer, the final U.S. offer. We do not know what was in that. That is an offer that's been left on the table. So there is still a door open to further discussion. But it's very much a basis from what J.D. Vance said of a take it or leave it to Iran. And as Osama was saying, let's wait and see what the Iranian version of events is before getting a fuller picture as to exactly whether there has been a movement forward or whether this has all fallen apart. One last point. President Trump is at a UFC match in Miami, Florida. He's not there. And interestingly enough, his Secretary of State is also at that same UFC competition. Although we did hear J.D. Vance saying that he's been in touch with all parties, including the President, the Secretary of State. But still, these events in the last few hours have been unraveling while the President is not actively monitoring the situation, rather being at a UFC match in Miami.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned President Trump, because J.D. Vance was asked by that journalist during the course of that press conference, you know, how often have you been in touch with the U.S. president? And he said, yeah, several times. He didn't give an exact number, but he said they had been back and forth with the U.S. president. And President Donald Trump saying this evening, whether we make a deal or not, it makes no difference to me. We've already won. I mean, he sounds, the President Trump at least, sounds like he's really keen to move on from the whole Iran crisis.
Well, it's difficult to get into President Trump's mind, but the fact that he is not actively and constantly monitoring these talks is in itself significant. That his terms put that together with what he said is that the U.S. has already won this war. Whether there's a deal or not doesn't really matter. It does appear as though the president is trying to put all of this behind him. He's looking for an off-ramp, even where there may not be an off-ramp in place, given the fact that there may be no agreement to these so-called negotiations. But it does appear from the fact that he's not directly monitoring what is happening to the fact that he's fairly dismissive of the chances of getting a complete agreement, saying it doesn't matter because the U.S. has won the war already. There does appear to be a real desire on the part of President Trump to move on.